Welcome to Performance Car Lounge, where each week we speak with enthusiasts selling their beloved performance cars. This week, we speak with the owner of a JDM Nissan R35 GT-R. On today's podcast, we're talking about the legendary R35 Nissan GT-R, and we're very lucky to have an owner and importer of GT-Rs and JDM vehicles, Chris, speaking with us today. Morning, Chris. How are you?
Good morning. Great. Hope you're going well too.
So everybody, Chris has imported his own R35 GT-R and he has some experience in importing JDM cars from Japan. So if you are interested in finding out a little more about the ins and outs of importing a car from Japan, stick around and we'll talk through that process. But first, Chris, I thought we'd talk about the R35 GT-R in general. For me, this car was a bit of a mythological beast from the East when it was launched back in 2007. Is that your recollection of things at the time?
That's exactly my recollection. When it was released 2007, I think my car at the time was a WRX, which was about 2 years old. And I was buying my first home. So I was a little bit strapped for cash. And I had a friend who had just bought a brand new GT-R in, I think, 2008. And I was like, wow, look at this thing. You know, this is phenomenal. You know, dual clutch transmissions. It was one of the first cars to actually have that. Transmission in the back, motor in the front. It was just mind-blowing. It was something so brand new. And I just wanted it. But unfortunately, at the time, I didn't have the finances. And the last couple of years, I've made enough money that I can actually afford one. And, you know, they have never disappointed me, that's for sure.
Yeah, I actually remember the lead up to the car. So I used to consume Wheels magazine and Motor magazine religiously when I was younger. And I remember seeing the concept at the 2001 Tokyo Motor Show and thinking, oh, that looks interesting, but it didn't really look like it was for me. And then I saw the prototype at the 2005, the pictures of that at the 2005 Tokyo Motor Show. And I still wasn't that convinced. And then in 2007, they actually launched the car and it looked better than the prototype, which never happens. And they launched it to this fanfare of a 7:38 Nürburgring lap time, which was faster than a Porsche 911 Turbo, which lapped the Nürburgring in 7 minutes 40. And they were pitching it as a car that was basically less than half the price. So that really got my interest sparked in the car. And then I started looking at my options to purchase one. I was lucky I'd sold out of a business at the time. I was driving a BMW Z4M coupe and was starting to track that. So I looked at, ways to get into a Nissan GT-R and I talked to Nissan Australia. And at the time, I think they were asking about $190,000 for a brand new GT-R, which today seems like quite good value. And I could also, though, get a JDM import for 140,000 brand new. And I ended up going down the JDM route myself as well back in 2009. And it was a very exciting time to own the car. There was so much public interest in this car. It had just appeared on Top Gear. I don't know if you remember. Did you ever watch that episode of
Oh, it's one of my favorite episodes. This car corners faster than electricity.
That was one of his
Yeah.
massive quotes from that episode. And Jeremy also said they haven't built a new car, they built a new yardstick. And
It was true, and it was very hard for Nissan at the time. Their sales were very low. Sports car wise, they did have an iconic car, which the R34 GT-R. It hadn't quite got the following that it has now, but it was a good car, and they had to do something very convincing after that to step up to the plate. And
I think we can blame
yeah.
Fast and the Furious for the R34 GT-R's increased
Yeah,
popularity.
I think there's a lot of owners out there which should be very grateful. They've
Yeah.
made some good gains there. But Nissan couldn't come out with just another RB26 car. They needed to do something new and something groundbreaking that sort of redefined performance, and they did. You know,
Absolutely.
it was
It,
something new, and
you're 100% correct. At the time when the GTR started development, Nissan were in massive financial trouble. They were making huge financial losses when the new CEO, Carlos Ghosn, was appointed, and he achieved a massive financial turnaround for the Nissan Corporation. But he also had a plan of reinventing the GTR, as you say, and he needed to move it on from the R34, which was, a technological tour de force as it was. And
mm,
they had those RB engines, the straight sixes, and they really had to improve the performance of an already very fast car. And like you're saying, they did a ground up redevelopment with the V6 engine. They chose that because of the packaging size, so they could make it a front mid-engined car, so that the engine could sit over the front axle. And as you say, there was the transaxle axle gearbox. It was just a stunning bit of technology at the time.
well, at the time, I'd never been in a car which could shift so fast and so violently.
200 milliseconds is
Yeah.
what Nissan are saying it can shift in, which is for 2007, and a car that's basically mass produced. That's super impressive.
Well, the reviewers at the time, there were a few which said, oh, a computer's driving this thing and whatnot. But when I get in my car at the moment, I couldn't disagree more. You compare it to the experience of driving a Golf with a DSG box or something like that, and a GTR is absolutely raw. You feel everything. It's a very mechanical experience, and
It
I
absolutely
really value that now.
It absolutely is. And I remember at the time people saying it's like playing a computer game. And in some respects, I can see what they meant. So I used to track my car a bit and drive it quickly on the road. And it was a super capable car, and its computers and smarts did fix up a lot of your driving mistakes and help you to go very quickly, even if you weren't the best driver in the world. And I remember Mizuno-san, the chief engineer, described the car at launch as a supercar for anyone, anywhere, anytime. But that doesn't make it not an engaging experience to drive. As you say, you feel everything. It's very mechanical, and it's very satisfying to drive. And you do feel like when you're driving it, you're defying physics, but that just adds to the enjoyment driving these cars.
Well, that's it. One of my neighbors actually has a late model M5 and it has the electronic steering. GTR steering is old school hydraulic.
Yep.
And when we get in the M5, no doubt it's a beautiful car. It's awesome. It has awesome power. The road holding's excellent. It's very quiet and smooth and all these things. But as far as road feedback, sort of driver engagement, it's more engaging to drive a GTR. It's like the M5 will deal with all of the bumps on its own and whatnot, but a GTR is just so direct. It's a really different experience.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And it's a unique experience. Even the sound of the engine, when you hear an R35 GTR fire up, you know that's what it is. And and it's interesting, those engines, while it was a mass-produced car, the GTR engine, which was a 3.8 liter twin turbo V6, was handmade in a different plant from the car in It was actually handmade in Yokohama in a sealed clean room. And there was 13 craftsmen that they called Takumi who put these engines together, and it took 4 hours for them to hand make each engine. So even the power output from each GTR is slightly different. They say it's 357 kilowatts, but because they're all handmade, I think they're all, slightly different in their power output. And the acceleration, that engine combined with the four-wheel drive and that gearbox for the time and even for today is still astonishing. It achieved a 0 to 100, I think, in about 2.8 seconds. And at the time, a 911 Turbo was doing 0 to 100 in 3.4, and a Veyron was doing 0 to 100 in, I think, 2.5 seconds. So it's a
Mm.
super quick car.
Oh,
And
the value for money was you couldn't beat it. And at the time, actually, I went in several 911 turbos. I was lucky enough to spend some time in Ruf in Germany, where I got
right,
to go in some modified 911 turbos, and the experience was mind blowing. And I must say, a 911 turbo is a smoother car to drive slowly. You know, it's more refined.
yeah,
It doesn't clunk around as much. It's a different experience. But when you drive a Nissan GT-R with enthusiasm, it all suddenly starts to make sense. The clunks are gone. It's smooth. It's almost like a rope swing the way the acceleration works. You sort of get that rush of torque where you have to hold on, and then you get used to it.
yeah.
Um,
A GTR is
but
definitely happiest when it's going quickly, and it's unhappiest around a car park, around slow, tight corners, where the diffs are chuntering and but I think that adds to the charm. It adds to the whole experience of
it
the car.
does. You've got to embrace those things.
Yeah.
And it was funny when I bought my first R35, which I ended up moving on. I sold the idea to my wife of buying an R35, showing her photos of a boot. Yeah, I can take this to the shops. We can take it shopping. We can put the kids in this. No problem at all. Try getting in a rear-facing baby seat into the back of a Nissan GT-R, you know. And at the time, I had some opportunities to sort of repurpose the money, and I sold that one. But I call it seller remorse. Every time I sell a car, I just want it back again. So I ended up buying another one. And unfortunately, at that time, another thing popped up. But now I'm on my third one. And okay, so we're going to Europe and we're looking to buy some cars when we're in Europe at Christmas. So we're moving this one on, but I'll buy another one. That it's just my soulmate, these things. I just love them.
Yeah, I think it's one of those nostalgia cars where many of us saw it, were around when it came out and lusted after it, but just didn't have the funds or the ability to buy them. And as time's gone on, the cars have dropped in value a little bit, and the people of our age have increased their wealth and are in a position now to buy these cars that they lusted after when they were much younger.
Well, that's it. I know they've got a few years on them now, but I kind of feel like they're the pinnacle of petrol. It's hard for me to describe, but I don't have any interest in electric cars at the moment. I probably won't buy one until I'm forced into it. And for me at the moment, I think I'll just about always have an R35 in my stable. It's just such a satisfying car to drive.
It is. And even the looks of it are just so unique. At the time when supercars were coming out, they were, the Ferraris, the Porsches, the Lamborghinis, they were all very sleek looking. And this thing was designed after a Gundam robot. It was inspired by that with a really muscular and blocky body. Yet engineering was such that it was still a slippery car through the air. So the coefficient of drag was only 0.26. And to put that into context, so I won't bore everybody too much, but coefficient of drag is a measure of how slippery a car is through the air. So a truck has a coefficient of drag of about zero point 0.9, not very slippery at all. A regular car has a coefficient of drag of 0.39, and the GTR had a coefficient of drag of 0.26, which is slipperier than Ferrari Testarossas and many other cars. So just the engineering that went into every aspect of this car just blows your mind. Everywhere that you look, there's attention to detail. There's no aspect of this car that's really been lifted from anywhere else or just carried over. They've optimized every part of it to go basically to go fast.
Well, I read that they went through wind tunnel testing 2,000 times to achieve that. And the interesting thing that drag coefficient is low, but they've managed more downforce than its predecessors. It's more usable downforce despite being slipperier through the air.
And
They're
that was
just an engineering masterpiece.
yeah, and that was another interesting point at the time because the GTR is quite heavy at 1,740 kilograms for a supercar, where most other cars were aiming to be light at the time. But Mizuno-san, the chief engineer, was firmly of the opinion that the weight helped the car. And the lap times, I guess, show that it did.
Well,
Yeah.
he was not the lightest car. He wanted one of the most engaging experiences, and I believe that they've achieved that.
Yeah,
Um,
I'd agree. And Speaking of that engagement and enjoyment in driving the car, one of the other standout features was the dash multifunction display. So the R34 had a color screen that gave you some good readouts on your boost and G forces and that type of thing. But the R35 moved the game on massively, where they partnered with Polyphony Digital, who designed the multifunction display. And Polyphony Digital at the time were working on the putting out the Gran Turismo games, which I'm sure we all played, and where we all drove GTRs because that was the only way we could afford to at the time.
I don't know of any other car, and maybe people could correct me on that, which has an infotainment system as good as the GTR. Like it's very intuitive. You can set up screens to show exactly what you want. It's easy to see. You don't need to sort of squint and look for data. You can drive with enthusiasm and still see the data. So I think they nailed it.
And the data adds to the driving experience. It's real-time live data where you're seeing any metric that you want to live in real time, clearly on a screen. It's very well executed.
Very well. Actually, the whole ECU, the whole sort of electronic system in the GTR is just a great thing. If you push the car too hard, it's very good at looking at itself and it'll go into limp mode.
I found
Initially,
that
they
out
were
a few
designed
times.
an uncrackable ECU. And of course, people found their way around it, but it meant that just basic modifications might trigger this thing to go into limp mode because it wasn't going to be so reliable. And I just think that they nailed it because apart from some of the early model sort of gearbox issues, which aren't really solved till about 2017, I believe,
Yeah.
the car is a rock solid performance monster. And I think that a lot of that is due to the ECU controlling things really, really well and not letting people break it, which is fantastic.
Yeah, like they said, a supercar for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And I think they nailed that brief.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about, I guess, your experience in importing cars from Japan and maybe even your experience with your GDR importing? If you're Joe Public like me and you're thinking you want to import a car from Japan, what's the first step? Do they have car sales? Like, do you just go on there and like, how do you go about that?
In Japan, there's different sort of sets of rules, and just like Australia, there's car sales in Japan. There's different platforms selling used cars. There's dealers, there's private sales, and then there's the auctions. Registration costs are different in Japan as cars get older. They get more expensive and whatnot. And sometimes, a lot of the time, it's easy for owners just to move the car on through auctions. So every week in Japan, 140,000 cars go to auction every
Wow.
week.
Wow.
Yeah. In there, like there's just performance cars galore. There's enthusiast cars everywhere. You know, people talk about cars running out in Japan. Maybe in R35 in that specific time frame, there's a few cars running out, but you can still import R32 GTRs in very good conditions that go through the auction system. You know, there's a lot to choose from,
You can
and
also, though, end up buying a real dog, from what I've heard as well. Some of these cars are salt and
yes.
rust affected and haven't been looked after.
So I'll give you a bit of my history. Back in 2013, my wife decided to become a professional cyclist and she moved to Europe for 9 months of the year. At that time, I was getting a little bit bored. What do I do? I decided to import a car for fun. So I imported an Evolution 6 Lancer. Yeah, that's one of those cars I have stellar remorse over.
Yes.
Magical car.
So was it a Tommy Mackinnon edition?
No, it wasn't. It was
Oh,
just a
okay.
normal one. But
Yeah.
honestly, they are just an excellent machine.
Yeah.
But anyway, after that, I sort of got this bug and I kept on importing more cars. I wanted to find out what it was like to drive an Evolution 7, an Evo 8. What's the difference? And I've sort of developed this bucket list of cars. And I've just kept on going. I kept on going until basically the import agent that I was using was no longer able to import anymore, change in life circumstances for him. And I decided, you know what? I've worked this out. I'm going to start doing it because a few of my friends were like, oh, I don't want to get a rough car. Can you get it for me? And I'm like, well, I use this guy. Oh, can you just do it for me? And I did sort of help some friends purchase their cars. And that's why I've started doing it myself. But the pitfalls of importing, there are some agents out there who are not enthusiasts. They're
Yeah.
more sort of salespeople, and they'll just sort of connect you with any old car and hope for the best. A GTR is an example of a car that needs to be inspected by an expert before you purchase. They need to be able to look for specific things to make sure that the car is in good condition
Yeah.
because
Especially things like that gearbox, for example.
things like the gearbox and there's common issues like with the dash cracking and different areas to look for rust and whatnot. If you don't have someone who knows what to look for, you're probably opening the door to a lot of problems. So when I import cars for myself now, I make sure that the inspector on the ground, the person physically looking at the car and sending specific photos and videos back to me knows exactly what I'm looking for. And I think that to give yourself the best chance of getting a good 16-year-old car, you need to go through an enthusiast. You need to get someone who really cares about the end result, who really enjoys it. If you get someone who just buys and sells cars all day and that's just how they make their money and they don't really care, you're probably going to get a bit of a lackluster result.
Well, and that's
Uh,
the good thing about it, you building a relationship with someone on the ground there, because if they want to keep working with you and getting business from you, they're not going to send you garbage cars. They're going to make sure they're
exactly.
sending across quality cars.
That's right. And over the years using the one inspection company now, I've had lots of Evolution Lancers and RX-7s and a few GT-Rs and different cars along the way. And I've sort of struck up a relationship. And as much as I'm searching the auctions every day at 5 a.m. myself for different cars, they are too. And they know not to send me the rubbish anymore. They know how particular I am, and
Yeah.
they send the good ones, which is it's good.
So if you are interested in importing a car from Japan, Chris can definitely help you out. Head to performancecarlounge.com.au. I'll have a link to Chris so you can get in contact with him and chat with him and find out a bit more about what next steps are. So you mentioned before as well, Chris, that you are now moving on your R35 GT-R. So when we look at it, this is a car that is a game changer. It is that mythical beast that popped onto the scene in 2007 and shook up the whole performance car scene.
Yes.
And interestingly, while we say it's a 16-year-old car, they have only just stopped making them. Been the same platform that has continued on since 2007. They've obviously upgraded the suspension and the motor, but it's the same motor. It's fundamentally the same car. So it's a very good opportunity to buy a performance icon at a
Yes.
bargain price. Can you tell us a little bit about your GTR that you're selling?
Okay, so my one is an interesting one. It's 2008 JDM GT-R. It's a little bit rare in that it had factory Nismo sports resetting, a few upgrades from factory and a custom tune and some custom testing to give it a little bit more than a standard car. And it gets a few badges and things like that, which just make it a little bit more exclusive. But when I bought the car, I was conducting some maintenance and I thought, okay, while we're here, let's just put on an upgraded intake. Oh, while I'm doing that, we better get a retune. And the next thing you know, the good guys down at GT Auto Garage have done a very solid tune. I'm very happy with the car. It's quite smooth and it's making 420 kilowatts at the wheels.
And
Now,
you've got a dyno sheet to
yeah, I do. I
show
do.
that. Anybody who's interested in learning more about this car, again, head to performancecarlounge.com.au. I'll have a photo of the dyno sheet there. I'll have photos of the car as well. So, is there anything further about the car that you think people might be interested in?
It's one of the better GTRs out there. There's no dash crack whatsoever. The interior's in good condition. It was ceramic coated from factory. I've got all of the service history.
And
It's a really good one.
what
Yeah.
auction grade was it?
It was an auction grade 4.5B.
Yeah,
So
they're
meant to
hard
be
to
a B
find.
grade interior, but it has a brand new dash that was done in Japan. So it's perfect in that regard. And there's 4.5 grade cars and there's 4.5 grade cars. I'm pretty particular.
Yeah,
There's barely a stone chip on this one.
yeah.
So it's a very good car.
All right. And here's not quite $1 million question, but how much are you asking for the car?
At the moment, I've got 97,000 on it. There's cars that are similar spec cars ranging from about 85 to 108,000 available at the moment. So I've just priced it somewhere in the middle there. But certainly, like when I park mine next to some of the others,
Yeah.
it becomes clear mine's a pretty good one.
If you're interested in this car, head to the website and we'll have photos of the car and a link to the ad, and then you can get in touch with Chris. Well, thank you very much for your time, Chris. This has been a fascinating chat. And I'm sure with your car journey, we'll probably be speaking on a future podcast when you're selling another interesting JDM performance car.
Well, it might not be JDM next time.
Cool.
We've got a Europe trip at Christmas where there's two Audi R8s on the cards for
Oh,
a
V8 or
road trip
V10?
across Europe.
Are you looking at the V8 or the V10?
V8.
Oh, well, I'd love to chat about that.
Yeah, when that happens, I'll keep you in the loop.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for joining us at Performance Car Lounge. If you have a performance car with an interesting story that you are selling, contact us at performancecarlounge.com.au.